Hello and welcome to this somewhat odd episode of Superhero Ethics. If you're also a fan of our other podcast, Star Wars Universe Podcast, you might have heard myself and Paul Hoppy doing a stinger where we got into a discussion of The Last Jedi and the character of Rey, and it got us into a larger discussion that the two of us had been thinking about for a long time about the way we talk about topics where there are quite a number of people with pretty horrible takes on those topics that are coming out of racism and misogyny and sexism and homophobia and all the rest of it. And sort of how you have a conversation that's nuanced and respectful and making different points in the midst of all that noise. As we started it, it was coming directly out of the conversation we were having in that podcast. But we kept saying, okay, we're just going to go one more minute. We're just going to do one more thing about this. And we kept not doing it. And it turned into 50 more minutes of us talking about it. And about halfway through that, we just kind of acknowledged we were all of a sudden recording an episode of Superhero Ethics. And so here it is. We're talking about a pretty nuanced, complex topic. And we're talking about it off the cuff. So normally, we don't rehearse what we're going to say. But we try to give it a lot of thought and a lot of consideration, especially with the more complex topics. We didn't do that this time. We were just kind of both shooting from the hip. And we're talking about a lot of things in fairly nuanced, complicated ways. And so I just really ask, take a listen to this. I hope you enjoy it. I think both Paul and I would love to hear your thoughts on it and love to hear your input. We get a little bit slap happy because we've been podcasting for quite a while by the point of this episode. But I think there's some really good discussion here. And I think it is more than anything an invitation to continue the conversation. I don't think either one of us is offering the last word on this topic. I think it's one that we as a fandom community are going to have to keep having. So it's probably, if we had a chance to sit down and plan out this episode, I think it would have gone fairly differently. But I also think in some ways this is for the best, because I really appreciate that we got to just have this off-the-cuff conversation and talk to you about this important topic. And I'm now rambling almost as much as we did that night with the stinger that turned into this episode. So I'm just going to wrap this up and say, I really hope you appreciate this episode. I hope you really kind of, like I said, if one of us says something that let us finish the thought, because we spent a lot of time kind of going deeper into it and pushing both of each other in, I think, a lot of really good ways. So thank you both. Thank you all so much for being a great audience. I really hope you appreciate this episode. Would love to hear what you think about it. Check out all the great episodes we're doing on The Ethical Panda. We're just about a week or two away from starting week-by-week coverage of Andor on Star Wars Universe Podcast. We're streaming about it now on Paul's Twitch channel. All the information about that is on Superhero Ethics, so on The Ethical Panda. So I'm done rambling. Enjoy this episode of Superhero Ethics. Right after this commercial break, we have no control over.
I think a lot of the time, the crux of it to me is like, I think a lot of the time you get something. We'll say just like a piece of media. We'll say a movie, right?
Right.
You get a movie and a bunch of people watch it. And some people are predisposed to like it. Some people are predisposed to dislike it. And very often, or just some people do like it and some people dislike it for whatever the reasons are, right? And as is the case with probably every single movie ever made, there are some things that are really, that are good about it. And there are some things that are maybe objectively have some issues, right? And I think what usually happens is the people who dislike the thing, or the people who are predisposed to dislike it or have some issue with it, only focus on any of the issues and use those, kind of weaponize those to try and undermine any of the good things about the movie. And then people who really like the movie often dismiss any criticism, especially now in these days when that criticism is frequently weaponized. And I think it can be very difficult to really either A, acknowledge, or B, consider objectively criticism that's being weaponized in a really gross way.
That's fair. One of the most dangerous things is to say, here's a topic that I'd like us to discuss at a later time, because we're both so bad at that. So I'm going to give one response and then let you draw a conclusion, and then we're out.
Sure. Yeah.
I think that's very true. I think I would label the causality a little bit differently. And maybe this is part of what you're talking about with weaponized, but I want to focus maybe more about this stuff, is that I think it is one thing to have a movie like, I'm trying to find a better example of like a movie that I love that like, there's a movie called Keeping the Faith that is one of my absolute favorite movies. I think it's a love letter to New York. There's a lot of things. I think it's one of the best romantic comedies ever made. And I think it's a very good movie about faith and about religion. And I think there are people who have very strong feelings about organized religion who are not going to find the joy in that movie that I find. And I think that's completely fair. And I think that, or if you just like don't like the jokes. I mean, it's also a very New York kind of a movie. And I mean that somewhat in like, yes, there's a lot of what I think of as Jewish humor, but also there's a lot of just like a lot of the movies about how there's literally a line of, if you don't live in New York, you're kidding yourself. Which like, so I didn't say like New York snobbery.
Right. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of legitimate reasons not like that movie. And I think that happens a lot. I think what is happening in fandom as a whole, and maybe it's always happened, and the internet has just made it a lot louder, but especially in the last 10 years or so, is that writers and directors and producers are starting to really try and tell more stories that aren't by white men and aren't written by white men and aren't about white men or white straight cis men especially. And I think we are getting a lot of pushback from that. And I think we are getting a lot of, and so, and maybe it's kind of what you might weaponize, but I would phrase it differently. To me, there's an awful lot of either A, people who are just like, I am not going to like She-Hulk, I'm not going to like Ms. Marvel. You know, all the people who review bomb the movie before it's released, who review bomb the TV show. And so, like, I think they are actively looking for something in this to dislike. And so, you know, you get situations where, like, they're so mad about, you know, She-Hulk spoiler. I'll use something more recent. Like, they're so mad about, you know, how is Ms. Marvel so good with her powers so quickly? When, like, how many men in the MCU have been so good with their powers, you know? Like,
also, like, is she, though?
Yeah, like, there's some She-Hulk stuff, you know, and, like, an awful lot of that stuff is clearly, to me, either intentionally driven by, like, we hate this, we don't want women in the MCU, so we're going to tear it down, we don't want gays, we don't want people of color. And then I think there's the more unconscious side, which is where, like, because I do think a lot of people, myself probably included, the internal biases we have cause us to have double standards in how we look at characters. And so I do think, like, a lot of the critique that I hear about Rey, I do honestly believe that there are things about Rey that bother them that would not bother them about a male character. And especially like a male like lead in that kind of a way. And so what I think happens then is, especially when there's so much of that attack and like you go online and you talk about how you like these things and now you've got 20 people in your comment section attacking you for it, I think people get very defensive. And I think here's where I'll come around to where you're saying, I think what that means is sometimes that anybody who says they don't like Rey, like when you first said you didn't like Rey as a character, I cringed a little bit. I was like, no, Paul's so good. I don't want him to be sexist.
When did I say I didn't like Rey as a character?
I think that's fair. Is that what you actually said was you were critiquing some of the stuff about Rey's power and how it grows, and what I heard is she's a bad character because, and that's my whole point. Is like,
yeah, and I mean, I led with I think I like Rey as a character, but there are blah 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 blah.
Right. I think that's fairly true. I think that's kind of the whole point is like when there's so much noise coming at people, it's hard to sort of separate out. And that's part of why I really like giving you a platform to be like, look, a whole bunch of people are making stupid arguments about this, but I think you've got a legitimate case to make. Go ahead. I want you to make that on the podcast. But yeah, because I think that this could be a whole episode, I think, of superhero ethics, of the way that the meta discussions make it harder for individual discussions to happen. And we might have different feelings on why that works, but I think we both agree that like that overall trend is true.
I think, I agree with the vast majority of what you just said, and actually nothing specifically sticks out in terms of disagreeing. So I would say I basically co-sign that, you know, I do think that the defensiveness is warranted, right?
Yeah.
But like it's still defensiveness, you know, and so I think it's like it's reasonable to not want to take an unreasonable person's argument seriously, right?
Yeah.
And when to me the main thing is like there's just people, I feel like, spend so little time really engaging on the points, but at the same time, a lot of the people trying to make some of the points that they're trying to make are doing it in a very trollish, trying to make that be the main conversation.
Right.
You know? And it's like, I don't think the main conversation about The Force Awakens should be whether Rey knew too much, too fast, or was too powerful, or this or that.
Right.
I think that's a reasonable thing to spend 5 to 10 minutes on in a 1-hour podcast. You know, and I think that's kind of the difference to me. And I do appreciate having, you know, the platform to try in this world we live in to give a nuanced view of, like, I think some of such and such criticisms make some sense, but that doesn't make it a bad character. That doesn't make it a bad movie, right? It's like, you know, I do think it is reasonable to be like, well, you know, Luke, like, really was good at a lot of stuff pretty fast. Right. I think that's true, you know. I think it is of an order of magnitude smaller than, you know, and, like, if you're like, well, you could have done this first, I'm like, yeah, you could have. Yeah, that would have been good, you know. Like, he does kind of seem to get over all these deaths pretty quickly, you know. Yeah. Like, that's not always the best storytelling, but it's like, that's the kind of movies they're making, you know.
Okay, folks, Paul and I love having these conversations. I have some responses. I lied. This is going to be a half-hour stinger, so hang up if you want to.
This should just be the extra episode you put in the can for later.
So,
oh, man.
Because I would hope the last thing I'm going to say about this is, maybe you'll have a response, I'll give you something else, but is, I think what you do, and like I said, when I talked about the first time you said that the critiques you had of Rey, I wasn't talking about the conversation we had a couple of weeks ago. I was talking about conversations we had like years ago, back when Last Jedi came out. And I don't think you contextualized it as much as you did this time. You may well have, but so that may be completely in my bad memory. But I think what you're getting at, though, is that this isn't what I'm about to say isn't fair, and I'll acknowledge that, because I think it is a crappy situation to have a legitimate viewpoint that it just so happens that a lot of terrible people have a viewpoint that kind of looks similar to yours. Like, and that's not your fault for feeling that way. Mm. But I think that in the media environment we are in, I think it is it's your responsibility, but I think it's just a lot better thing to do what you're doing, of saying, like, yes, I'm about to say some things that are critical about the way the character of Rey is portrayed in these movies. I'm going to acknowledge that a lot of people do really horrible things in their critiques of Rey, and I'm going to clear, I like the character of Rey. I'm just pointing these things out. I don't think it's necessary, but I don't think it's anyone's responsibility, but I think that kind of thing really helps, because what I see too often is the flip side. Like, my personal favorite example of this is when we're having yet another, like, for some reason people are talking a lot about The Last Jedi, and you're just getting, like, you couldn't post anything on TikTok anywhere or Twitter without just a million people saying a thing you liked about The Last Jedi, without 100 people coming out of the woodwork for it. And, like, one of the things that, like, the best example I know is, like, someone put up a post, and it was nothing to do with Last Jedi. They were saying, I love the character of Admiral Akbar because he's ugly. Or at least he's not pretty by any human conceptions of it, or some human conceptions, but, like, he's not traditionally he's the kind of character who normally would be a villain. Star Wars made him a hero, and that's great. That was the entire thing. Yeah. The first 15 comments were all, yeah, but it was really terrible the way he got killed in Last Jedi, and, like, Johnson totally pissed all over the memory of him. And it's like, come on, folks, that's not the point. And so I put up a video that was just saying that. That was just like, hey, listen, if you don't like Last Jedi, that's totally fine. Make videos about why you don't like it. And if someone makes a video saying, like, hey, what do you think of Last Jedi? Or saying, here's the things I liked about, choose your battles, and maybe in those spaces go in and say, okay, you invited me to talk about Last Jedi, or it's my own page, I'm going to say why I don't like Last Jedi. But, like, don't, we know you hate Last Jedi. We know you think Rey's a bad character. Stop pushing that narrative into every place you possibly can. Mm. And then that post got 13 different comments out of 18 comments, all saying things like, well, but, like, the critique of Last Jedi is warranted because here's all the reasons that Rey is a bad character because she's female. And so it was just like, I think you've gotten away kind of my original point, but I think it was just, to me, it's kind of the addition of like contextualize. If you're making a point that a lot of pretty terrible people might agree with, contextualize it a bit. But, and this is not saying this to you, this is just about these conversations in general, but also the picking the battles. Because I think in a lot of ways, it's not just the arguments, it's the way people, and I think this can be true on every side, but can be bullies about it and can be like, hey, I have this agenda. I'm going to go to your post that's not about this agenda at all and make you, kind of what you're saying, make the conversation be about Ray's powers didn't develop in a sensible way. So therefore, you're not allowed to talk about anything else about Ray.
Right. Yeah. So first of all, I mean, I think they're kind of helping you out when they do that because they're really helping you to build a nicely well cultivated block list.
Also true. Also true.
But yeah, no, it's obnoxious. Like, don't do it. Like when people are like celebrating their enjoyment for something or just talking about something they liked, like that's not the place. Like make your own TikTok, make your own tweet, That's like, there's no reason to like go and like crap on everybody else's whatever they're doing, unless whatever they're doing is like, causing harm, right? Yeah. And I don't see how somebody talking about how they liked a movie can like really be causing harm. I'm gonna push back on I don't like I think calling these people terrible people I have a big problem with. Mm-hmm. Because I think the things that you're criticizing them for, I think are very, very legitimate things to criticize them for. Some of the things that they do, I think, are easily classified as terrible behavior, awful things to do. Some of them are just like bad, but like as a vegetarian, like I feel like if you classify everybody who's like saying a bunch of toxic shit about media as a terrible person, I'm going to have to classify like 99% of the world as terrible people. And that includes you. And like, I don't want to do that. So I can't conceptualize people this way, And I feel like I do understand like if they are personally attacking you, having a feeling about that.
Right.
You know what I mean? But I just feel like, terrible people, like these aren't literal Nazis. And even like amongst the actual Nazis, the ones who like, you would just be like, that's definitely a terrible person. It's like, mostly it's a lot of people going along with like really stupid shit, some of which is very evil shit, but it's like, if you live in the United States and you pay tax dollars, like your tax dollars are going to like really evil shit. Like, shouldn't we just stop paying taxes and shut the government down until they stop freaking bombing people? Like that would be a good thing to do, but that's hard, And so I just feel like, when you phrase it like with agreeing with terrible people or whatever, I'm like, well, I feel like that's, and I respect the view, but it's just, to me, I'm like, people who are making points for, I would say probably malicious reasons a lot of the time, right? And I think that's fair. I think it's people acting out of malice and like, I don't believe in the Force and people are on the light side and the dark side and it's that simple. Humans are humans. Everybody does some bad things. Mm-hmm. Everybody does some good things, more or less, and how you classify those things is somewhat subjective, blah, 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 blah. We are now 40 minutes deep into a superhero ethics episode. Why am I still talking? But yeah, I 100% with you. Context always matters. Like, don't go to someone else's post and like tell them why there's actually this thing bad about that. Like, if I'm talking about the Batman and why I think it's the best, most well-made superhero movie, and you're like, yeah, but it's so dark. I'm like, okay, just you make your own post about that. You can make your own posts, people. Yeah. No,
I think it's a very good point. And honestly, I think to pull it back to Star Wars, even though we are now in a superhero ethics episode.
Yeah.
And I may well just post this on something.
Yeah, no, you should record another thing that's like, we recorded a stinger, but that's actually going to be a superhero ethics spinoff. Then we won't have to record one of those this week, right? Yeah, or next week or whatever.
So my response there, though, is, and oddly, this makes me want to play poker because most of our discussions we had like this were like, wow, we were like having a snack before going back to poker.
I feel that. Let me fire up the app.
And a tangent within a tangent, also just to say, I think you are perfectly within your rights to judge me for eating meat. And like, I don't love the fact that I still eat meat. I eat meat in a much more thought out and attempting to avoid animal cruelty than I used to. And that's 90% because of you. And I think it's probably very possible that as I age, I'm also going to be cutting out more and more of my meat usage because I want to, for the reasons you have told me about, and also because of the reasons I've seen on myself, and because it's also better for my health and all that kind of stuff. So please, maybe not, call 99% of our audience horrible murderers, but certainly call me that anytime you want. Go for it. But I get your point. And here's the main thing I wanted to say about what you said. You said like you don't actually believe in the Force, but in some ways, I think you called me out very well because I think you're right. And I think what you actually pointed out is what I think is the central message about the Force, which I think is true, which is that hating evil can become a way to start to do that yourself, Yeah. And I think that I don't think that, and I used to have that in a very like Martin Luther King, like Star Wars proves that Martin Luther King was right and Malcolm X was wrong. And like, I'm way beyond that. And like, I hope we don't have to come to physical violence, but if you're in a situation where the police are literally your enemy and you have to fight back, like I'm not gonna judge you, But so I think that is a very true thing. And I think the other part of it is like, I think there's two things there. Is that one, when I say terrible people, it's not the acting on fandom that way. That by itself is what I mean. What I mean is more when it is coming out of racism, coming out of sexism, coming out of homophobia. But even there, because again, I do want, on the one hand, I want to acknowledge that I do think a lot of that, I think there are people who have very internalized, who due to internalized racism or sexism or phobia, judge characters by double standards, and they don't have any idea they're doing it. And like, to me, that is separate from the person who's like, I don't want women in the MCU. I'm going to attack every woman, every movie. I think the biggest thing I was thinking about it is because I want to figure out like, how do I talk about the fact that, yes, I think this is a terrible group, but yes, it's made up of individuals. We need an ACAB for fandom. And what I mean by that is like, well, kind of what I love about the whole ACAB movement, which is all cops are bastards, and maybe some folks on this don't agree with that, and that's fine. But one of the things I think that allowed me to, because I was sort of like, yes, the police system is fundamentally broken, but I do think there are good people who believe that they can make good change within the police system. I think they're wrong, but I think those good people exist. And the people who, like, when I actually dug deeper into the history of the term and like what people mean by that, people were acknowledging it's not the point, is that every individual cop is an individual bastard. Far more of them have domestic violence than most other populations, but still, like, there can be individually good people, but it's the idea that the institution of policing as a whole is fundamentally broken and wrong and terrible, and if you're a part of that, that is always going to be a part of how you are judged. And so that's the kind of like, you can have individual nice guy cops and still all cops are bastards. And I think that's kind of where I think calling them all terrible people, you're right, is incorrect. I do think if you're a bully, that's wrong. I think just bullying over sexism and racism is wrong. But yeah, it's I think that I love Twitter, I love TikTok, but when you're speaking in 256 characters or 1 minute, nuance becomes a lot harder. And honestly, more than anything, that's why I love these podcasts, because we get to go into these nuanced conversations.
At length.
Yes. At great length.
Yeah, no, I love what you just said. I really agree with all that. I prefer all cops are bad because, bastards kind of like a little bit, heteronormative and,
Do you think if Game of Thrones hadn't existed, do you think most people today would associate bastard with a person born to an unwed mother?
I mean, I think it's widely known that that's the the origin of the word, right? That's the etymology. Whether people think of it in as literal terms so frequently, probably no. But yeah, that's the word. That's where the word came from. It's a bad word.
I would say the word has evolved past that to mostly mean just a bad person. But then you're right. I do think Game of Thrones had a pretty significant effect that now everyone's reminded what a bastard means. But
also, like, I mean, I prefer not. I'm not big on like reclamation of words. Like I'm not going to tell other people not to do it, but like I generally don't do it. Where I don't feel like you can actually like cleanse a word of its meaning.
Right.
But like that was a very minor point. Why am I still talking?
We're now onto a second superhero ethics episode about linguistics.
Yeah. No, but I mean, I 100% agree. Like, those motivations exist and like they're not good. And, there's probably a corollary that the majority of people engaging in this behavior online are probably also doing, engaging in similar, what we consider terrible behavior offline as well. Right. And that there's correlations there. And I just personally think, my way of going about it is and I'm specifically mean my way of going about it, not like the right way of going about it, but
right.
like my way of going about it is to try to be like, yeah, I want to acknowledge what you're saying I agree with, right. And then specify what that doesn't conclude in, like, like the words Mary Sue, like that's a really flawed idea that like I understand where it came from, right? And there is inherent sexism in that. But like also like any character, it's like you can't, you were talking about Captain America and I was like, yeah, he like kind of can instantly do stuff pretty much in that, after he gets his muscles, which seems like maybe a little bit weird, like he might be tired and want to pass out, but then again, he's tripping. I think I don't know, but like
we actually literally talked about this exact point on the Marvel Movie Minutes episode that won't come out for a while later, but
right.
Because I was saying like, I saw him throw a punch at the beginning of that movie. He does not know how to throw a punch.
Right.
And
but he did go to basic training. Like, he did actually do training in that movie. Like, I'm going to throw that out there.
He did, like, a week of basic training while he was learning how to, while they were picking, he would get the super soldier serum.
Right,
like,
right.
Anyway, I think...
Yeah. The point being that, like, a lot of people, that there definitely are double standards. And, like, for things like, if I'm ever going to call out, like, that a movie only has terrible male characters, like that all the male characters are terrible, I only feel comfortable doing that because I'm going to call out The Dark Knight for only having one female character of consequence and her being fridged, and not having the agency or the relevance that she had in the first movie, know? And so, like, I think, like, you don't get to call out, misandry if you're not calling out misogyny, like, at least twice as much, basically, right? Like, there's a lot of things where we have problems kind of in multiple directions. One of those problems does a lot more damage. Right. And if you're only focusing on the one that causes less damage because that little bit of damage is towards you, then like that's not cool. That's not okay. Right. But like if you're going to call everything out, like that's what I'm here for.
Yeah. That's sort of how I am. Like there's a recent controversy about some property where a female character dances in a way that a lot of people have had a lot of objections to. And like there is one person who put up a post and was like, look, I swear I'm not those people. Look. And he showed the posts where he said, I hate Star-Lord dancing. I hate Zemo dancing. I was like, okay, you have the receipts. You have the receipts.
Exactly.
I can believe you. And like, yeah, because that's the thing. Like, if you just hate dancing in the MCU, sure. But it's double standards. Yeah, I think it's all such a good way to put it. So, thank you, Paul. This was a great episode of Superhero Ethics. That was not intended.
Star-Lord dancing and all of them dancing. That's actually like kind of an amazing plot point.
Yeah,
I just have to throw that out there. And I did enjoy the recent thing to which you alluded, as much as I was like, oh my God, I can't look away. I can't look away. What is happening?
Yeah, I thought all of those dance moments were brilliant for their characters. Like, I think Zemo dancing was great. I think, et cetera, all of them. Okay. Because there was one more question I was
Bring us out. What? There's one more question. Are you going to cut this in two?
I'm probably going to cut it in two, yeah. So we just recorded a whole other episode. But I think it's been a pretty short one. The one other point I'm going to make, which is a total lie, but I'm going to try, is I do think one of the reasons why I like talking to you about this specifically is that, you are kind of a social media hermit for the most part. And I recognize that sometimes you are, like, this is sort of like praising your ignorance. I don't mean it that way, but like, I fully believe that sometimes you have these thoughts that are not affected by everyone else because you don't know what they're saying. And like,
no, that's true.
I think we have the receipts of this. I think it was on air. It might have been when we were talking about it, but I remember during Kenobi, you had some like, legit critiques of Reva, but they sounded like they kind of rhymed with some of the horribly racist attacks on Riva. And I told you, like, yeah, but it's important to understand that all these other people are saying these other things about Riva, and you were like, wait, really? Oh my God, that's terrible.
No, that's definitely not at all what happened.
Okay.
I appreciate your thought that might be what happened. There was a time when you were referring to the Tolkien white guys in the MCU, and I was like, that's hilarious, nice joke. And you're like, yeah, this has like been on social media for the past 3 years. I'm like, I would have given you credit.
Go ahead.
I did actually see on, like, I looked on Twitter after one or maybe the second episode of Kenobi, and I was like, I was bringing up, like, you know, it seems like this horrible stuff is going on, you know, and it's frustrating that, like, it feels like we can't just talk honestly about the character. Like, what do you really think about the character? What's going on, you know? And
you definitely brought that up. I thought I remember that during the first episode was when I
there were 2 episodes.
Right. Well, that what I'm saying is that my memory is shot. I think it happened with some property. I might be completely wrong.
No, I guess it's possible that I said a couple things about the first 2 episodes, and then the 3rd episode is when then the whole sort of thing blew up. But I don't know. I mean, you know what it is? I think people were talking about it after seeing the previews, which I didn't see.
That's it. I think
that's probably it.
Yeah, so you first brought out the critiques, and I was like, yeah, it's important to acknowledge that all these racist people are doing this terrible stuff. And you're like, no, that's not what I mean, though.
Yeah, no. And I rewatched the Queen's Gambit again, and I definitely prefer her performance there. But and the Queen's Gambit is just such a good example. So here's, okay. This is the last thing I'm going to say. I'm going to say 2 things. One, there are... No, this is another episode, right? We're actually in another episode.
No, it's just I want to make this like one of our quotable taglines is, okay, this is the last thing I'm going to say. I got to say 2 things.
One, I wanted to recommend my friend's book. So that I'll do that at the end. The Queen's Gambit, and this is going to substantiate your point, but also my point.
Okay.
Right? The Queen's Gambit, I think, is one of the best pieces of media. I'm talking about the limited series on Netflix, which is what everybody thinks of, although there's a book that it was based on that I haven't read yet. It's one of the best examples I can think of a character going from knowing nothing, having talent, working hard, and becoming exceptional at a thing. Yeah. They really, really show that process. They show her being amazing at it very quickly, which is the thing that happens with some kids. Some kids get obsessed with chess. They have an ability to visualize. That seems to be some sort of natural aspect of it, right? Some sort of talent, but then also get obsessed with it. And the more you think about it, the faster you can improve, right? Yeah. So, but then they also show her struggling. They show her losing games. They show her needing to learn things, needing to overcome certain gaps in her chess, studying books, a lot of books. You know, she really works at it to get to the point where then she wins some tournament that is not the world championship. So this is a fantastic example of this, right? And it happens to be a female character, right? Which is cool, because I feel like female characters, I have a problem with how many female characters are instantly powerful in a lot of the media we see, because it robs those female characters of having that arc and of that accomplishment. And because I think that is a really important thing to see characters working hard at something and gaining skill and gaining ability. And so when somebody, you know, with Rey, it's less of an issue because she uses the Force, right? But like with some other characters, it's like, it is like, yes, I want to see that. And my friend wrote a book called Shijak, like to begin or something. So it means to begin in Korean, S-H-I-J-A-K, right? Mm-hmm. Her name's Catherine Yang, Master Catherine Yang. She's a martial arts instructor that I not grew up with like as a kid, but like we both taught Taekwondo school. She still has a Taekwondo school in New York. It's about an 18-year-old who really, really, the whole thing is just about training at Taekwondo and eating food and making coffee. That's like,
that sounds like a great
it's book. A novel, you know, and it's like, it really shows the whole training process and the process of being really good at something, but having to really work at it, right? And I highly recommend that. Go buy it on Amazon or something. Or read the beginning. There's a look inside. So the thing about the Queen's...
We'll have a link to it in the show notes.
Awesome. The thing about the Queen's Gambit is that it does this better than almost anything I've ever seen. I feel like Avatar: The Last Airbender does a great job of that, both with Aang, but also with Katara, right? They show her as well, growing over the time. And then with Sokka, they're like, yeah, we'll give him an episode where he, learns sword fighting. But like, the Queen's Gambit does this so well, and yet you still get that criticism. Yeah. Which to me underscores the fact that sort of criticism, there are people looking to have that critique, and they don't particularly care about whether they're making a legitimate point or like a load of crap point. Yeah. And when it comes to the Queen's Gambit, they're like, oh, but she barely even studied and then she won the world championship. It wasn't the world championship. It was just like an invitational in Russia, I think, right? But like also she really trained for like 15 years. Yeah. It took a while. It took a lot of hard work. It is reasonable. We have 12-year-olds who are grandmasters at chess. That's a real world thing, right? So like it is totally believable. It's a great journey. And yet you still get people crapping on it. So, I think that makes both points the best I can.
I think that's a really good way of talking about it, because I think you're right. Queen's Gambit captured the fact, like, for me, a hero, there are generally 3 ways the hero can be very good at something. They can be just very naturally talented at it. Like, they're just like, and that, to me, that's kind of like, in Queen's Gambit, Beth being basically like a prodigy, right. and her having these abilities. Or like someone who's just like a natural athlete and then becomes, a great fighter or something like that. So there's natural ability, there's training, which is kind of, that's more like the Daredevil route, where like, or like Batman, he just like, you work at it, you train at it, you do all these things. And the third is some combination of either like magic, or like you're the chosen one, or you have the blood of the dragon, or like for whatever reason, right. You're just preternaturally predisposed to be this amazing person. And I think the best stories certainly combine some elements of those first 2. Yeah. And I generally don't like the third ones as much, but if they have it happen, at least wrap it up with something. Yeah. And which also I'll say, I hate to me, I think to go back, way back, I think part of why I don't like Rey Palpatine so much is I think that was I think one of the biggest problems with the sequels is that the later movies, and here I will blame Rian Johnson quite a bit for this, I think Rian Johnson, and maybe it was studio pressure, but I think both Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker made a number of attempts to sort of placate the angry mobs, which I think they should have done. And I think making her Palpatine was their answer to, oh, Rey shouldn't be so powerful. And instead it was like, no, all Jedi, all Force power is genetic. So it's right. Luke, so I hate all that.
Yeah, me too. So
I think all that's true. The other thing I was going to say, though, and for this, I sorry to keep talking about it, but I literally was on the podcast 5 minutes ago. And so I'll credit, it was Andy Nelson and Pete Wright. They kind of made this point, because I was talking again about, like, why don't we see Cap learning how to throw a punch, learning how to sneak into a prison, although that Hydra prison is incredibly badly guarded.
It is really poorly guarded.
And what they pointed out was, remember, like, we got to a point in kind of our culture where it was like the zeitgeist, at least, was kind of like, we're over training montages. Like, stop giving us training montages. And that was part of the whole, like, we don't want origin stories anymore. Just, like, show us characters who are good at the stuff, or if the origin story is there, don't show us training. Like, I feel like
this was before the no more origin stories thing. Because they did, like, 4 origin stories really fast, and I was like, all right, maybe let's back off this.
I think they're very connected. I'm not just talking about the MCU. I think this is true kind of across these medias. Yeah. I think we didn't get female heroes until we kind of got into a point where we were kind of sick of training montages. And so I think that may be part of why, and here's again where I think you're clearly coming from a different place, but I think for some people, there are male characters who we also don't get training montages for. And the double standard there again is like, and here's where I think the sexism comes in. I think one of the ways that unrecognized, unconscious sexism, and I think I certainly was guilty of this for a while, until I really worked on it myself, is it's not that you're like, oh, I hate this female character, but it's that on some level, it's easier for you to believe that a man is good at physical fighting than a woman. And so you have a feeling of like, you can't believe the character you're seeing on screen, and you're like, so the writer should have done more. And maybe they should have, or maybe they shouldn't have, but because part of it's that unconscious bias. So yeah, I think there's so much that goes into that whole idea of the training montage stuff. But yeah, I think you're right. I think it's perfectly fair to say you wish we got, like, to me, I think there's a big difference between saying, I don't believe this character because we didn't get a training montage, versus what you're saying, which is, I like the character, but I wish we'd seen more of her development because I think that's a cool thing to see in a character. That to me is very different than you have to justify to me this character's power, or else I'm going to say she can't have that much power.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Like Wonder Woman, like, I don't need to see a training montage for Wonder Woman. She's Wonder Woman. You know what I mean? She can show up like Superman and just bust heads. And like, it's just, yeah, she's Wonder Woman, you know? Right. And like Captain Marvel, the same. Like, I don't feel like I need to see her, like, yeah, she got superpowers, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I'm going to say, like, Ms. Marvel, there wasn't a lot of there was a training montage, right? Yeah. And I think the show is better because they included that. And I think if they didn't include that, and I think that sort of invalidates how did she get so good at her powers? But no, they actually had a training montage. Yeah. Would I enjoy it if they had even more? Yeah, of course. I'm never going to be over training montage. My life is a training montage. Yeah. I'm literally doing some stupid, like, 10,000 hour challenge of just training. Like, you know.
Yeah. Like, to me, the training montage is important, but to me, even more important is when she tries to use her powers and winds up breaking a kid's leg. And like, she did prevent the kid from dying. And so I think people should give her more credit, but still, she tries to use her powers and screws up. She is still learning. Like, I think that's a great example.
Yeah, I thought that was really well done. And then by the end, she's like pretty good at using her powers, you know? And to me, that's kind of like Luke in the original trilogy of Star Wars, is like, he doesn't do a ton of really impressive Force stuff, you know? Yeah. And I think there are things where you can be like, well, this doesn't make sense, or this could make more sense. And sometimes I feel that, but more often I do feel just like, I want to see that story. Like, I want to see female characters, but I want to see, it's like the opposite of, it's like, I don't feel like that bothered by being robbed of a training montage with male characters, because we've seen a lot of those, you know? Yeah. And so it's like, I want to see a mix of different things. And we do have some, right? But just we haven't had as many. And part of the thing is that it's like, there still haven't been that many, you know, like female-led, you know, superhero films, right? There just still haven't been that many.
We don't have a control to compare things to. We've got like 5 or 6, you know? Yeah,
exactly. And, you know, a character like Black Widow, I feel like, well, the end of the movie, I felt like, oh, okay, you know, this doesn't make as much sense as it could. But that was just like the way they did it. Like, she's a character who clearly had a ton of training, right? And her skills, like, I am happy to see her have tons of skills that she worked really hard to get. And she's like the Batman of the MCU in a lot of ways, you know?
Yeah. No, I think it's totally fair. You know, I think that's a really good way of looking at it. And all right. I think we are done with tangents. I think we're done with one. I will give you the floor for one last thing. I am done with one last things. You give one last thing if you have one, and I'll respond, and then we're done. Or you say none, and we're done.
I did my 2 one last things already, so book it.
Cool. All right. Well, Paul, thank you so much for doing this. Unplanned, completely unscripted, supposed to be here's the thing. I think
special episode of superhero Star Wars ethics.
I think we did get a good stinger in answering the question, and so I'll keep that. We just then went in this whole thing. But honestly, this is a discussion we've been wanting to have for quite some time.
Absolutely.
And that I think is really important to have in fandom right now. So
I think so.
There we go. Yeah,
anyway. We aired it out.
Yeah. So for Paul, those who don't know what you're doing, I have no idea when I'm going to air this, but you're probably going to be doing some things that are about the same. What are you probably going to be doing whenever I air this?
Yeah, so I'm still working out some of the details, but I'm basically torturing myself for the next 5 years with like a 10,000 hour challenge of training that is either 10,000 hours in poker or it's 10,000 hours of poker, like training, not playing. right? Like actual attempting to improve over those hours and then playing on top of that, and possibly another 10,000 hours of what am I doing? I'm trying to become legitimately good at chess, not like Beth Harmon good, but like very good. And I'm trying to learn a number of languages, including Spanish, German, and Cantonese, and then possibly Mandarin, Toisanese, and French, and like maybe Italian. Yeah. It's too much. I need to cut some things out.
I'm not sighing because of what you're doing, because in the 25 years I've been friends with you, this is not the first time you've had very ambitious goals, and you reach them sometimes for sure. So, but no, I was sighing because I'm pretty proud of the fact that I've spent 15 minutes a day on Duolingo every day for the last 47. It's good. It's a little dwarfed by some of the companions you're trying to do, but there you go. So
Anyway. Well, I'm basically trying to do like 15 minutes a day of a number of different things. Also some writing and music and Taekwondo and Tai Chi and yoga. Oh my goodness, it's too many things.
So here's what we're going to do, folks. Paul is going to go on this journey. I'm going to ask them about it at various points, but also you have to tune into the Twitch, because we need to check out the grayness of their hair and the position of their hairline at multiple points over the next 3 or 4 years. So I'm sorry, but just to help understand this question, you have to now watch, at least check in every couple of months on the Twitch stream. So we'll see how your progress is doing.
So first of all,
we are now deep into the stinger of an episode that only occurred. This is like the fourth wall break and a fourth wall break. This is the stinger within the stinger. But go ahead.
I'm lost in the meta of our meta. I won't go on a rant about ageism. I mean, you were referring specifically to stress.
Yes.
My hair is like a fair amount white and other colors. But I don't think my hairline is ever going anywhere, because like everybody in my family had all their hair into their 90s. So we'll see when I hit 100. None of them made it to 100. So
this is mostly just the fact that in this one area of genetics between you and I am winning, in that my hair is mostly still the color it is. The only area of genetics.
I don't know. I think as much of yours is a different color, but you chose that with your dye.
That's true. That's true. Anyway,
but again, okay. I won't rant about ageism, but like I could. It's one of those things that it feels like people can just get into with like carte blanche. Whereas like if you say things like that about race or gender or orientation, like you're just like, it's received so much differently. It's a huge peeve of mine.
And here's the thing. God, we're going to get into another ethical topic. I think I wouldn't have made that joke 15 years ago. I make it now because the silver fox is a thing. Like, I totally think if I don't like, I think people, their hair goes gray, it goes white, they still look damn good. So to me, that's why it's kind of a like, I'm teasing you about it because it's honestly not a big deal.
Sure. Somebody did give me a George Clooney comparison at one point, referring to my hair. So like, which obviously not right now, as I basically buzzed it all off. But I was like, I'll take George Clooney.
Yeah, that's a thing you can take. So we're wrapping up now. Go Google Zen Madman to find Paul. Google The Ethical Panda to find me. Nothing else. Tell us what you think. The Ethical Panda, we're out. Go away. Hit stop. The podcast is over.
Oh my goodness. I'm going to hit stop, and then I'm going to go to the bathroom.